Hey there. Welcome to episode 10 of Nintendo Deep Dive. Nintendo Deep Dive is a entertainment podcast centered around retro Nintendo consoles and retro Nintendo games, including reviews on all these aforementioned things. The voice you are hearing belongs to me, Carl, the creator and host of Nintendo Deep Dive. For anyone who is a previous listener of Nintendo Deep Dive, also formerly known as Nintendo Archive, there has not been an episode in, I think, a couple months. Last episode I did was Pilot Wing 64. The reason there hasn't been an episode was with the release of Tears of the Kingdom, I figured any interest in a retrospective Nintendo podcast would be minimal for at least a couple months. So, not wanting to get my little rowboat swamped by the wakes of that particular cruise liner, I just pulled it out of the water. But now we're putting it back into the water and we're going to continue on as we were previously. That being said, today's episode will be a little different from previous episodes as I have no games to review. As I have no games that I have beaten to review. Currently, for any new listeners or anybody who just needs a reminder, I was in the middle of doing a deep dive on the N64 and the Game Boy / Game Boy Color alongside of it. But prior to Tears of the Kingdom coming out, I had beaten all the games, or not beaten, rather I had reviewed all the games that I had currently beaten up to that point, so I have no games to review, which is a nice thing for me. Typically I beat half a dozen games and then I have to sit on them for 4 to 6 months before I actually review them, which the iron's still plenty warm enough, but it's not exactly hot. However, as I've already stated, I'm all caught up on the games I had to review, so until I beat Conker, or Conker's Bad Fur Day, as it is known, I will not have a game to review, so there is no reviews for today's show. So what we'll be doing instead for episode 10 is I'm going to do a game check-in. Just talk about all the games that I've been playing for the past couple weeks. That will not include The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I have planned a discussion panel episode with Steven from the Level 1 Sword gaming channel on YouTube. And that will come out in late July or early August, whenever we get around to it. We haven't recorded it yet, but for those who watched my Tears of the Kingdom playthrough, you already know some of my thoughts on that game, but now that some time has passed, I definitely have some additional thoughts, and if you want to hear them, you will hear them on an upcoming episode with Steven of Level 1 Sword. So definitely look forward to that. But for the time being, we are not going to be talking about Tears of the Kingdom. Everything else I've been playing at this time, there's about maybe 3 or 4 games I've been playing that we're just going to talk about. So with all that said, let's talk about Conker's Bad Fur Day. And by talk about, I mean touch on for maybe a minute or two. I did not grow up with Conker's Bad Fur Day. My parents weren't squares, but I don't think they would have let my brothers play this game. It's a little too crude and all of that. And, all the things that Conker is. So this is my first time actually experiencing Conker. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I've been enjoying it a fair degree up to this point. Don't love it. I mean, I don't hate it either. It's just, I've only played it for about 7 hours. And for those 7 hours, I had been pretty stuck for 2 to 3 of those hours. Still stuck right now. No idea where to go next. It's very similar to Banjo-Kazooie in terms of what it is. It's kind of a collectathon, though. It feels more linear and story-driven and task-based than Banjo-Kazooie. Still a similar thing, though. Of course, the big famous thing about Conker's Bad Fur Day is it's quite a mature game. Mature in the sense that what a 12-year-old or a 12 to 15-year-old thinks is adult. Very much that, it's that Family Guy demographic of mature. And that's its claim to fame. I was unsure how I would take that, as not really big on Family Guy and crudeness and violence and shock and awe entertainment, whatever you want to call it, not really my bag. But I have been enjoying the game's tone to some degree, not because of the tone itself, but because of something else. And this is what I'll say for the game and leave it there until I review it. The game developers, rather, they weren't trying to be funny with this game. I think they were making fun of the idea of a mature game more than anything. The Rareware team, if you look at their writing in Banjo-Kazooie and other things, even Donkey Kong 64, they can be cheeky, like very cheeky people. But they're never really mean-spirited in their writing. And not Banjo. Conker, there's like a really mean spirit to a lot of its humor and storytelling, whatever you want to call it, which you could argue was always there a little bit with those other games. Like, maybe you could kind of see it, and this is just them let off their chain. But I don't think that's what it is. When I hear about the development of this game, the game was often criticized is not really the right word, but it didn't show well at some of the events it was being shown at because they thought it was too cartoony and put up against Banjo-Kazooie. It didn't really differentiate, but a lot of the feedback they got was, oh, it's too cutesy and cartoony, which, it's a cartoon squirrel, so why wouldn't it be any of those things? And I think the developers, they almost out of spite or some kind of glibness, they decided, okay, we'll make this game about a cartoon squirrel mature and adult. And what they did was they made like a parody version of what an adult game is. And so I think at some point there's like references to The Matrix. There's definitely a reference to Saving Private Ryan and lots of movie things. And I don't think the developers did that because they were passionate about making this mature game that is referencing all these cultural touchstones. I suspect that they're just making fun of the idea of what a mature game is. And they're doing it with a cartoon squirrel, almost like them saying it's like, well, what do you expect a cartoon squirrel does in this sort of game? But okay, we'll put him in these adult stories. And maybe the team actually was really in... what's the word? Maybe they were actually invested in the jokes they were telling, and I'm reading the wrong thing out of it. But I look at this game and I think I don't think it's a comedy. I think it's a parody. A lot of the humor is just so immature, and it's not really funny. It's just kind of mean. Over the top violence and death that's very needless. And one thing about there is a parody, they are parodying the notion of these collectathon platformers that Rare actually pioneered, and just video game objectives in general. At one point, Conker says to a guy that says, "Oh, now we're great friends." He's like, he's like, "Actually, this is just a means to an end." Clearly lampooning the idea that, you just do things in a game to get to the end objective. And that stuff I've actually found quite funny. A little on the nose, but still humorous. The other stuff, I just don't see an adult man really getting too much out of making a cow get the shits and then bashing her to pieces with a charging bull. Like, I don't know. It seems like they're making a point about something rather than, being actively invested in that sequence. So that's Conker. You can see how I feel about it in my review for it, if I do review it, if I get unstuck. The next game that I've been playing is Super Smash Bros Brawl. Specifically, I've been playing the Subspace Emissary campaign with my brother. And initially, he invited me over to his apartment because he had the idea that we could make the stages that I had built when I was 14 or 15 in that stage builder. Though it became clear to us that there are stage components that we don't have that we have to unlock. So maybe by doing the campaign, we would unlock some of those. So that put us on the Subspace Emissary. A few years ago, I had talked about the Subspace Emissary campaign being something that I really enjoyed, but as I've played it more and more, I've realized that it's a pretty flawed experience in a lot of ways. And I was talking to my brother about this rather. And he was more convinced that it was actually still very much a good time. And as we've been playing it co-op, we've had a pretty good time with it. But where we are in that particular game mode, he's now starting to come around to my point of view on it. We're currently in the middle section of that campaign. There's technically two sections of that campaign. We're in the middle section of the first section, and we're in some of the really bad, mean-spirited levels that don't feel really good. It's the desert levels where the cutscenes that were prominently featured throughout the game story, a lot of those cutscenes just aren't showing up, and the level design is just pretty uninspired, and the hazards within those levels is just quite mean-spirited stuff. And so let's just say we've fallen out of love with it. I mean, I had always been out of love with it, or at least for the past little while, but now we're really getting a first-hand look at why Subspace Emissary isn't this perfect platforming beat 'em up campaign. And to get in some specifics, I have an anecdote about one of these particular desert levels, and it involves a portion of it involves a windswept staircase. I mean, there's wind in the entire level, but with this staircase, the treads are clear, but the rises are laden with spikes. And you don't really move all that well as far as platformers go in Smash Brothers games. In Brawl, you're particularly floaty in addition. So platforming's not great, but you're trying to jump on these clear treads all the while trying not to fall short or go over so as to land on these spikes. However, you have this wind that's actively pushing your character. So it's very easy to screw up where you're going to land. And if you do screw up, you'll get bounced into the air, and you can maybe position your trajectory to land on the tread above the one that you're trying to land on. However, if you don't get pushed onto the next rise of spikes, you can either get up like a neutral recovery off the ground in place, but if you do that, the wind probably will push you back into the spikes or into the next row of spikes. Or if you try to do a much more active recovery that's quicker, which involves a roll, you'll roll back into the spikes you'd previously hit, or roll forward onto the this new set of spikes. So that kind of hostile level design has been very prominent in our playthrough, if that makes sense. And so what ends up is just this never-ending cycle of hitting spikes, getting launched into the air, coming down in a stunned state, and then hitting the next group of spikes because you really don't have that many options. And, I'm sure a better player could manage to avoid this or recover from it. But I think it's clear that this is just a damage tax that the game is exacting on you just to be funny. And it is kind of funny. And in that same level, there's also elevators that you'll make contact with them enough to have them activate on you, but not enough contact for you to be in the box of them when they take off. Luckily, the elevators will come back down in a hurry, but unluckily, you'll be directly beneath them when they're coming back down. It all happens pretty quick, and you'll get smushed and instantly die. For different reasons, you can also end up on top of these elevators, in which case they also activate, and and then you'll get crushed that way too. As Emilio Estevez once said, "Hasta lasagna, don't get any Anya," in that MI film. Don't remember what happened to his character. Maybe he'll come back in a future Mission Impossible film. Needless to say, there's definitely some peaks and valleys in that campaign, and we're certainly in one of the valleys. On the bright side, there's lots of opportunity to commiserate with one another, which always feels like it brings you closer to a person. All the same, the Subspace Emissary campaign is flawed, but very respectable. A lot of effort went into it. All the different enemies they made, some of them look kind of generic, but others are very original and very interesting. One of the enemies is it's like a tank on tank treads, naturally, but the turret, it's not a rotating turret, but a fixed turret that looks like the helmet and a visor of a knight. And from the front of that tank, that vehicle, he'll shoot out an arm holding a lance to skewer you, and he's quite hard to take out. Another enemy that's like also pretty original is this floating octopus that comes in with this sinister laugh, and he's dressed up like a classical Greek warrior with that kind of bronze helmet on, and he's holding two swords, and he's a, well, not just him, all of them, all the enemies in these games are pretty quick on the draw, so it makes for a fairly challenging beat 'em up campaign, and I do appreciate all the different enemies that are introduced throughout it. I also appreciate the fact that most of the backdrops in this side-scrolling adventure are hand-drawn, and we're playing it on the Wii U in 1080p, and they look fantastic. The entire thing looks really good still, and that game in particular, it had such a cohesive art style, which I talked about in the review, that really gives it a atmosphere and vibe of its own. I don't even think Melee necessarily had it, though Melee does have a super strong atmosphere. Lots of the Smash Brothers games do, but Brawl's audiovisual design has really held up, and it's very interesting. So we've been playing that and been having a lot of fun with Brawl. And by a lot of fun, I mean we've been having some fun. It just, we're just in a miserable part of the subspace emissary right now. In addition to playing Super Smash Bros Brawl, me and my brother also tried out the Pikmin 4 demo. A lot to say about it, a lot of apprehension, but I'm only going to focus on two big takeaways from that demo. First thing is the controls. Just shoot me now. I hate the controls in this demo, not because they're bad, but they're very in line with modern difficulty design in Nintendo games, in that it's a game, particularly with the controls we're talking about, it's a game made for babies or people with babies. The way you target enemies in Pikmin 4 is, if they're at 12 o'clock and you've moved your throwing reticle to 1 o'clock, it will just snap onto the enemy at that point. And so a lot of the finesse that was in all the previous Pikmin games, it's not there. And I asked my brother, he was playing it. I didn't really want to play too much of it, though I guess I also then played it for a bit. We were playing the demo together. It was like, how do you target their eyes, is what I asked him. He's like, well, you can't, he said. And I'm like, yeah, it turns out you can't target their eyes, which was the thing that if you're really good at Pikmin, you could get the bulb orbs on the eyes, and that would really put them on the back foot. Took some finesse, but that's what a game is, getting good at the controls. But it's a pretty simple on-ramp that goes to nowhere, as far as I'm concerned, with this new controls setup. Yeah, I don't really know. There's other things about the controls too. With the auto targeting, it basically disambiguates what you can reach with the Pikmin and what you can't. Like if you try to throw a Pikmin at something far away, it just won't put the reticle on it at all. It won't even attempt to, or it will just snap right to it, one or the other. And I don't know. I feel like the game's treating me like I'm an idiot, which I am an idiot, but not to that degree. Like, it's kind of embarrassing that they don't want players to waste a couple seconds trying to reach something far away. I mean, that's part of the exploration. It's like, I wonder if I can reach that. Let me try a couple times. Maybe they just thought that it would encourage you to switch to the yellow Pikmin sooner than the red Pikmin. It's a very beautiful game, maybe one of the best looking games on Switch. Well, I think it is the best looking game on Switch. Pikmin 3 was one of the best looking games on the Wii U, but that's really all it has going for it so far. I already pre-purchased it. I'm probably going to enjoy it to some degree, but the controls that there's also no motion controls other than using your whistle, which is pointless. It's all stick controls for the throwing, which is really weird when you have gyro capabilities on your Joy-Cons. Second thing to talk about with the Pikmin 4 demo, I noticed a lot of soft gating, which is also another modern Nintendo design thing. Really big in these Legend of Zelda games since Breath of the Wild. And basically, I mean, soft gating is pretty self-explanatory. There's hard gating, which, you know, they won't let you get by there until you get the key for the locked door, or a story sequence causes something to change about the environment that opens the way, you know. Soft gating, it's like, oh, that cliff is a little extra taller than the others, so Link may not have enough stamina to get over it. As he is, of course, you know, you just cut one lawn's worth of grass in Breath of the Wild, and then you get 10 restless crickets, and then you cook them up, and then you just clear, no problem. That's a soft gate. In Pikmin, the hard gate used to be the water. And this is the demo. This is the very start of the game. They give you ways to just circumvent the water right away. Typically in Pikmin, the water would really corral you into, you know, certain parts of the map until later in the game. And then you got water Pikmin. And they would go along the riverbed or the creek bed and probably run into a bunch of pieces for a bridge, and then there's make the bridge, and then that hard gate would be overcome. You know, that's how they kind of determine the pace of these old Pikmin games. It's very similar to Zelda and other just games in general, classic game design. But in this new Pikmin 4 demo, you just get a bunch of ice Pikmin, maybe 10, 30, 50, and then you just freeze the pond over. And also, it seems like you can just have Ochi swim around with a certain upgrade or whatever it is. Probably pretty early on, because you don't want players to wait. That makes them antsy if they don't want to get vexed by something. They might drop the game if they want something and they have to wait for it. So Ochi can also go across the water carrying Pikmin from the trailers. And I don't know, it doesn't feel good to me to have all the barriers in these Pikmin games be so easily overcome. Perhaps there's other barriers that you can, not you can, but that the developers use to hard gate some of the other areas and, you know, tantalize the player with. I don't like soft gating though. It's just pointless. It's like, oh, well, you can get over here, but at the cost of small inconvenience. It's like, okay, I'll just do that. And as a result, the developer now can't really make an experience, like tailor that experience to be properly paced or just properly measured out, however you want to say it. It's mostly a pacing thing, but you know, the act of seeing something that you want and not being able to reach it is the art, or the basic fundamental, not even the art, of tantalization. If everything's reachable, then nothing's really tantalizing. So there's not really that much sense of progression in just doing a short little jaunt over somewhere and picking up something. It's like a quarter underneath a car, as opposed to, I don't know, a $5 bill on top of a mantle. You would have to be 5 years old in that latter example. Not really loving that modern Nintendo design. Both we're not going to make gameplay mechanics that are deep and enriching, but they take a little bit of finesse to wrangle them in. And we're not going to give you any hard barriers, because that would make you sad that you can't have the thing that you want right away. Which, it's all a matter of instant gratification versus delayed gratification. We don't want you to struggle with the controls. We don't want you to be flummoxed by a barrier or a hard creature. We just want to present you with easily obtainable items, so it's fun times all the time. Not terribly excited about this new Pikmin game. It won't be terrible, but it's not going to be great. There's no way that this game's going to be great. And all the previews from what I heard was like, oh, it's super accessible. It's like, well, Pikmin 3 was already pretty easy. Pikmin 3 was easy for a reason, but it was still easy. So I was hoping that these previews were talking in relation to Pikmin 1 and 2, which are pretty vexing games. Still good, and there's good cause for their vexation, I suppose. But no, the game seems to be a baby game where just with a little bit of effort, you can get anything you want. And so it's probably going to turn into a game where you get strung along by quick little objectives that when you accomplish them, fires off a little endorphin in your head, and that makes you want to play more, so you can play for much longer with this sort of breadcrumb of simple, easy tasks that are ultimately insipid, mindless, and probably repetitive. Other things I noticed was what I call, the death of idiosyncrasy. And idiosyncrasy is just like a game having its own kind of way of being. And it's not necessarily meaningful mechanically or structurally. It's just, that's an odd little quirk about this game that's not in other games. And an odd little quirk about Pikmin, and was also just tied to its arcade roots, is that you don't upgrade things from a menu. It's not an RPG. You just find things of use to you by knowing where to look. You just go out and find them. If you want to build a bridge, you find some pottery shards, and there's this very tactile, beautiful feeling of piecing these pottery shards together to make a bridge and watching the Pikmin go back and forth and doing it. In Pikmin 4, apparently you just make bridge parts in the ship by collecting crystals, and probably you can make bombs or you can upgrade the dog. And so now instead of finding things to aid you just out in the world and exploring, looking around, now you just upgrade them in the ship in a skill tree, in a boring standard skill tree, which isn't terrible in of itself, but the idiosyncratic nature of finding bombs in old anthills or finding piles of pottery shards that belong to a specific bridge that was out, that's all gone now. All the bridges are interchangeable, and you just find these little glass shards and then you convert them to other things. Currency, and you can upgrade the dog, Ochi, rather than just having him upgrade as you find things, or just upgrading through the process of time passing. That was a lot of things about Pikmin 2 is like, you just look for nectar, or if you have a Pikmin long enough, they just bloom flowers. It's a very organic game, and having these menus seems dumb. And I say the game's very visually beautiful, but also I noticed that the UI of Pikmin 4, real step down. Like the UI design, real step down from Pikmin 3. Pikmin 3's UI design is masterful. It is legendary. It's so beautiful. And that came from Pikmin 2 as well. Like Pikmin 2, I really like Pikmin 1 a lot more than Pikmin 2. But Pikmin 2, the one thing it did really well was it just added all that character and texture to the Pikmin franchise with all the names that it gave stuff, crystal clairvoyance for marbles and stuff, or what they named the fruits in Pikmin 3, continuing on that. They go above and beyond with the UI in Pikmin games, where they have in the past. In this game, I don't know, it seems like a cut below. So, not in love with Pikmin 4. So, my brother and I, though, we weren't really interested in playing Pikmin 4. I told him that there was a multiplayer mode in Pikmin 3 that I had never played, he had never played, but it was one of the best multiplayers ever made. And it was called Bingo Battle, which they're carrying that through in Pikmin 4. It seemed less interesting, but I'll know when I find out. It still looks pretty good. all things considered. But the interesting thing about Dandori Battle is that it's just shoehorned into the single player, where you fight an AI, and that's clearly the Pikmin team saying, we're so tired of putting all this work into these multiplayers that no one's ever heard of or played, so we're just going to make you do it in the single player so you can actually play it after. Which goes to my point of, yeah, me and my brother had never played this multiplayer, and apparently no one has. And we played it, Bingo Battle, and it was phenomenally fun. But just Pikmin 3 to gush about that game a bit before I actually get into Bingo Battle. I am not a huge Pikmin guy. I bought Pikmin 3 because I had a Wii U, and the Wii U didn't have a huge library, so if there's a game you can get, you get it. And I got Pikmin 3 because I knew that Olimar was in Smash Bros Brawl. And I would go to play that game for half an hour, just give it a chance, that sort of thing, lose 4 hours. And that's just how it happened every time. And I don't think I realized how much I appreciated that game until I was finishing it. But, from the go, it was just an arresting game. And it's one of the top 5 best Nintendo games ever made. Best games just in period. Pikmin 3 is wonderful. It uses the Wii Remote technology really well, but using the stylus on the gamepad, a phenomenal way to play that game, and it uses the gamepad really well. The gamepad's kind of a joke, or it's a joke to a lot of people. I really like the Wii U gamepad. It wasn't always something that was really utilized, but in Pikmin 3, the utility of it inspired a lot of great design choices in that game that I'm not going to get into. But with the multitasking capacity that it gave you, you could just be present everywhere all at once on a map, essentially. And it didn't make it easy per se. It just made it so that you were doing micromanagement on a whole nother level than in the previous Pikmin games. A phenomenal game, and it's a beautiful game. It's maybe not as good looking as Pikmin 4 graphically, but the UI design of Pikmin 3, impeccable. We were playing it last night, and when you get that little pop-up menu that says, do you want to save your game, or do you want to quit, or next match, just something unimportant. The menu is this translucent surface, but reflected on that surface is the interior of the spaceship that the co-pilots are in, all the dials and buttons and screens, just on this unassuming dumb menu, or a pop-up window rather, not a menu. Marvelous UI design. Just care in a way that's unrewarded. It's incredible. I love it. And there's these little, I think the main menu for Pikmin 3 is just the title of Pikmin 3 cycling around another translucent, beautiful, unimportant orb in the bottom corner. And the maps that they made for the gamepad, they're way more detailed than they've been in, or that they've been shown to be in Pikmin 4. In Pikmin 4, the map is blue. In Pikmin 3, it's a one-to-one top-down recreation, of the place that you're currently in. So much care, visual care, and the gameplay implications. Marvelous game. And so we go to play Bingo Battle, and all of that is present in Bingo Battle too. There's 12 maps, which is quite a few to choose from, and all the maps, they're not taken from the campaign. They didn't just cut them out and then repurpose them. No, they're original locations that you don't see in the campaign. Lovingly crafted. The graphics are probably a little worse because it's split screen, but even so, loving attention to detail in these unique maps. And As for the gameplay, ton of fun. Basically, it's bingo, so you need to get 4 across or 4 diagonal, 4 down, whatever. And each of you are given a similar but different bingo card, and you have to collect those 4 things, or any 4 things to get your bingo. And for most of the match, you might just be passing like 2 ships in the night, but as it goes, you are given ways to really screw with the other person, from electrocuting their Pikmin to killing them outright with a meteor shower, which is so infuriating. And sometimes we kind of have an arrangement not to do that to each other, but sometimes we don't. And beyond that, we're just trying to collect fruit, and sometimes we end up fighting over the fruit or the objects, whatever we need to collect. And so we might end up attacking each other's armies of Pikmin over one fruit, and it becomes a mess. And if you throw Pikmin on the opposing captain, then the captain loses the ability to throw until he shakes the opposing Pikmin off. And you can throw mines at the other person. You can throw bombs at their base if they have a bunch of idle Pikmin there to kill them. Just mean-spirited stuff. All the while you're, not trying to kill each other. You're just trying to do something else. But you end up inadvertently doing some despicable things to each other. Or you don't see each other at all in the match, and it's an interesting dynamic. And sometimes you just see what they have, and you're close by it, so you take it from them, so they can't use it, and that means that eventually you can cut off all routes to a bingo. So the game throws in a bunch of randomizer items that, they might complete your bingo for you, or they might just fill in some other random slot. It's definitely a party multiplayer game, but it's way too much fun, and it's part of a game that didn't need it. That game was already impressive without it, but it's just another feather in its cap. So that's Bingo Battle. It's way too much fun. I had a really good time playing with him. And he, I asked him how he felt 2 rounds, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, it is great. It turns out you were right." I'm like, "Yeah, I heard from the guy who it was the Bit Block who put me on that, and man, it's a great time." Last game I want to talk about for the show is Wario Ware Get It Together. WarioWare Get It Together might suck. That's a very harsh way to put it. I think it will be maybe an okay game, but I really enjoy the WarioWare series. Smooth Moves it's probably the second best one. Mega Party Games, because of all the multiplayer options, might be the best one. That one on the GameCube, but doesn't matter. The WarioWare series is super great. It's short-lived, but it doesn't matter. Just give it a couple years and go through it again, and you'll have a great time. But I was playing WarioWare Get It Together with the same brother, and what wasn't really doing it for me. The primary reason it wasn't doing it for me was probably the multiplayer aspect of it, and also the fact that you are now controlling a little player character. And you wouldn't think that would actually change the experience too much. But if you think about WarioWare, typically WarioWare is this vertical slice / vignette / not a diorama, but I guess a vignette. It's just this random event that's occurring, and you just get thrown right in the middle of it. And a lot of the value of that is the humor behind what you're looking at. And I think when you're introducing player characters into the mix, I think the vignette that you were looking at in previous games kind of gets pushed off to the side or faded out slightly to make that scenario more readable, since you now have player characters, where, in previous Wario games you sort of just had direct control of this vertical slice of whatever you were looking at. And in doing so, I think it means that the vignette, or the whatever you want to call it, is less striking, and there is that little bit of humor at the end still. Like, you still get that the punchline, but it just doesn't hit as hard. The other thing that I think makes it not as fun is it's not very fast. I recall me and my brother were both 9-volt on our skateboard, and we throw out the yo-yo to hook onto things to grapple up to the next level in a Super Mario World vertical slice of that game. And the amount of time it took to beat it was just quite an undertaking for a WarioWare game. And WarioWare games, their gameplay isn't actually that incredible. So if you spend any amount of time with it, it could probably become quite dull. And it did in this case. So I think the trick to the WarioWare formula, and it may be repetitive, but it works, is have very striking vignettes that move quickly, that cycle through quickly. A micro game. That is the structure of those games, and I think Get It Together doesn't really capture that with these player characters that just kind of slow everything down. It's not the end of the world, because now they're making a sequel to Smooth Moves, which is a great WarioWare game. Hoping they can keep that magic alive. But prior to getting Get It Together, I did get the sense that people didn't love it because there seemed to be more interest, a rejuvenation for WarioWare Gold, which when WarioWare Gold came out, the problem with it was it wasn't new. Like, all the mini games were old, but they were just repurposed, redone visually, and it was just a greatest hits album. And it reviewed well and people liked it, but again, didn't have that novelty of new games. But with Get It Together coming out, it seemed like they wanted to relive the old WarioWare. And as I said, you now have Move It coming out on the Switch, so WarioWare is alive and well on Nintendo Switch and just within Nintendo, so I'm not super disappointed that Get It Together might not be terribly interesting. And I've only played it for an hour, though. An hour of WarioWare, it kind of needs to hit pretty quick. You kind of know if you like it within 5 minutes. But we'll see. So those are all the games I've been playing. Just some of my thoughts on them. Again, if you would like to hear more of my thoughts, if you haven't had enough of them for Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, I'm going to be doing a discussion panel. Hopefully within a couple weeks. I don't know how long it will take for editing, but I'll be doing that with Steven from Level 1 Sword. If you want to check out his stuff, he's over at Level 1 Sword, or the Level 1 Sword channel, pardon me, on YouTube. And by all means, I heartily recommend checking out his stuff. He does a lot of good videos on handheld gaming and other topics too. Like, there was one I was in the middle of, haven't finished it, but I need to, about game guides. So certainly check out his stuff. And by all means, I hope you return for he and him, his and mine, his and he and I's. Pronouns, intenses are starting to really confound me here. He and I will be doing a discussion on Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, so please return for that if you've enjoyed the show in the past. Otherwise, that will do it for today's show. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at nalistenerq@gmail.com. That is nalistenerq@gmail.com. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can reach me in the comments. By all means, I'd be happy to hear from any of you. until next show, take care. Have a God bless day.